Good afternoon from Arlington, Virginia. I'm Lindsay Addington, NACX Director of Global Engagement, and it's my pleasure to be hosting Chris Page, Executive Director for the Council for Standards on International Educational Travel, or CSIET, here at the NACAC office. NACAC has appreciated our engagement with CSIET over the past couple of years, and particularly over the last 18 months, as we've worked together to establish model standards to guide secondary student recruitment efforts of F1 international students. NACAC has been instrumental over the past 10 years in shaping the dialogue and guiding best practice around, at the higher education level, around the use of commission-based agents. And we recognize what an important process this was to undertake for CSIET and the critical work that still needs to be done to affect change. We are thankful for your participation today and today's events, and excited to share more about these new model standards and the process to undertake this change in the community. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you to NACAC for taking part in this effort to create model standards around the cohort of students that are 18 and under. This is very important, especially at a time right now when we're experiencing lower numbers of students that are seeking F1 positions in schools in the United States. So this is a wonderful opportunity for CSIET, but also I think for the greater community.
Great, thank you. And if you're just joining us, we're thrilled to have you. Tell us hi in the comment section and let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you have questions for Chris, let us know and we'll answer them at the ends of the broadcast. In the meantime, we have plenty of our own questions for you, so we'll jump right in. Chris, for those who don't know about CSIET, could you give us a brief introduction?
Yes, CSIET, we are a nonprofit 501c3, and we've been in existence since 1984, really at the behest of the Presidential Youth Exchange Initiative of then President Ronald Reagan. So a body of non-government organizations as well as government organizations got together and really felt with the influx of J1 students into the United States that there needed to be a body of standards that the community could espouse. And so that's kind of how we were born. And since then we've had sort of several iterations of standards, but the key to our standards is that over the years we've had an evaluation process of the third-party organizations that bring in the J1 students and now the F1 students for the last 7 years. So we'll talk a little bit more about that and our initiative with the model standards and the international student recruitment agencies.
Great. You've referenced student enrollment figures, but according to research from the Institute of International Education, international secondary student numbers more than tripled between 2004 and 2016. And of the nearly 82,000 international students enrolled in U.S. high schools, the majority, or 72%, were directly enrolled on an F1 visa, compared to the short-term exchange, or J1 visa. The rate of growth is slowing, however, which is also a trend we're seeing at the higher education level. And at NACAC, we've been monitoring the impact of the growth at the secondary school level on the college counseling profession and their work with these students in the college admission process. What do you see as the biggest challenges facing high schools regarding F1 international student recruitment?
I think that the greatest challenge is striking a balance between sustainability of programs and best practices. You see them typically as sort of flip sides of the coin. If we're going to run an international program that has significant sort of standards in place and we have to worry about compliance, then that limits our competitive ability. So there has to be a balance that is stricken between those two. We're seeing lower numbers of students from China. This is also a challenge. The students not coming to the U.S. on the F1, but rather choosing other countries like Australia, England, Canada in particular. there are a number of challenges that face us in terms of how we are perceived. We are perceived in the United States at times to be somewhat unsafe. That's a perception. Other things that contribute to the issues that we're facing are visa delays, rhetoric that we're hearing from our own administration, and not the least of which is the amount of cost that parents, natural parents, are having to bear when they seek to have their children enroll at U.S. schools.
Like I mentioned, we're seeing a lot of similar issues at the higher education level, and so I think it's great that we're able to kind of bridge what's happening at the secondary level and the higher education level through some collaborations and work on these standards. Remember, if you have questions for Chris, please leave them in the comments and we'll answer them in just a few minutes. How is CSIET uniquely positioned to address some of these challenges you've just mentioned?
Well, we started as not just an association of third-party agencies. We began as an evaluator of these organizations. So we have had an evaluation process that has existed for our J1 program since 1984. And beginning in 2013, we began to evaluate the F1 programs that help schools bring students into the United States. And we evaluate them on a set of long-term standards using an audit-based system, which requires organizations to contract a CPA, and that CPA will go through their files and essentially, according to the 29 different audit items, will sort of check off to make sure that a board-approved threshold is met for each one of those audit items. So it's a level of scrutiny that perhaps doesn't exist elsewhere, and particularly in the F1 market. We don't necessarily, J1 has a robust regulation. F1 does not really have a regulation in place. So for the US-based F1 organizations, we have a clear set of standards. So it fits right into our wheelhouse in terms of what we already do. We're a natural place for that sort of thing. And that's why we began to look at model standards for international student recruitment agencies.
Great. And so a year ago, as part of this process and as part of CSIET's shift to focusing more on the F1 environment, you put together an advisory board to look at some of the challenges facing secondary schools and their recruitment of international students. Specifically around their engagement and use of agencies based internationally. And can you share a bit about the process and what resulted?
Yeah, so we responded to a survey. We surveyed about 400 different independent schools about what the needs were, what the issues were that were surrounding the international students. And there were many and varied responses, but the ones that came up typically were that, for example, English language testing perhaps being falsified or adjusted. Other issues that arose were related to transparency in terms of scores, in terms of essays being falsified. So we got together as a group and several different agencies. CSIET pulled together NACAC, as well as NAFSA, NAIS, AIRC, the Global Education Benchmark Group, the Association of Independent Schools Admissions Professionals, as well as Enrollment Management Association, and TABS and NAIS. All of us got together and really sat down for many meetings to take a look at what were the common practices that each of these organizations had relative to the one specific piece that we're looking at here for international student recruitment agencies from abroad. And I want to be specific about that. That means non-US based agencies. We got together and developed a body of standards as well as a set of definitions surrounding this. And the result being now that we're in a position to where we can do things like this and get the word out about the standards. So that's where we are right now.
Great. And so that process resulted in these new model standards.
Yes.
And so I'd love for you to dive a little deeper into those standards, the topics they cover, and how they're organized.
So CSIET has, as its strategic plan for the next 5 years, an acronym, STEP, which has helped us to really formulate what we are doing as an organization. STEP, it really means stewardship, transparency, engagement, and partnership. So that's sort of how we're intending to move forward with our own members, but we also organize the standards around these various tenets. So if we talk about stewardship, for example, one of the standards that we have in place is that organizations must be able to carry out their financial responsibility to their constituents. So if we're going to evaluate organizations, they need to be able to demonstrate that. That's under stewardship. With transparency, there are a number of different, in fact, this is the largest of I think there are 9 items under transparency, which you can see in the standards. But with transparency, really it gets to that notion of, okay, who are the owners of the organization, and what do we know about the owners? Are there issues of fraud related to the organization? Are they being transparent about the scores that they are representing? That sort of thing. Engagement really gets to the notion of basically complaints. So there's a process for complaints. So if an organization does not have a clear process for the submission of complaints, then they have not demonstrated compliance with these particular standards. And then one last example, if we're going to partnership, is really partnership between US-based schools or agencies and organizations abroad for the purpose of training. Really, that is where I think the rubber meets the road. Is we've got training in place both for the staff in the U.S. that are dealing with the international student group, as well as the agents and the agencies abroad who really need to know a lot more about the U.S.-based schools. And so I think that if we look at these standards, what they're really meant to do is, of course, look out for natural parents and international students and the schools alike, and make sure that the experience is safe and valuable. But it is really meant to be, it's a calling on behalf of all of these organizations to adopt a body of standards so that we can make our programs in the United States sustainable, competitive with other countries, and hopefully some of the best in the world.
Great. Yeah, your STEP kind of acronym mirrors what NACAC and the Commission on International Student Recruitment came up with 10 years ago regarding transparency, accountability, and integrity. And I think we tried to share some of those values through this process as well, which was great. I'll take a brief moment and see if we've received any questions. And we haven't at this time, so please, if you do have questions, if you're tuning in and you'd like to inquire further about the new model standards, please send your questions for Chris in the comments. Chris, I'm also curious about the process and kind of how a secondary school or agency would go through this process. And do you currently have agencies that have signed on and committed to this process?
Yes. So we have 3 agencies right now that have signed on to go through this initial model sort of standards evaluation process that they're taking part. One is from Italy, one is from Beijing, another from Shanghai. We've deliberately kept the numbers low because we really, with this group and as well as a few board members, are really taking a look at what the best way is to go about evaluating these organizations. So they're sort of 2 things that are going hand in hand. We already have an existing sort of audit-based process for evaluation of US-based agencies. This is the direction that we're headed in with the foreign-based entities. And so this particular group that comprises board members and international student recruitment agencies will be working together to develop an audit template that is part of the job that we're taking on right now, as well as determining how one would demonstrate compliance in specific areas. So for example, if we're talking about test scores, have those scores been verified, and how have they been verified? And an auditor, a CPA, someone could come in, take a look, and verify that the number of students that were sent to the U.S. Met the criterion based on the requirement. So that's the process that we're going through right now. Our typical annual process would begin with an application for certification in November. They would complete the audit-based process and have an actual site visit from CSIET. And then once we have determined sort of compliance, meaning that they've met board-approved thresholds, in the case of critical items, that's at 85% on each individual audit item. We at that point we are able to render a decision as to whether they should be listed or not. So again, this is a pilot program, and what we're imagining is that the more people know about these standards, and the more that organizations like NACAC are doing things like this, the more opportunity that we have to get the word out, the more opportunity there will be for international agencies to engage, and as well for schools to begin dialogue surrounding these standards.
Yeah, to dive into that last point about the schools, what is your expectation or hope for how the schools will be involved in this process?
Well, it was interesting, I mentioned earlier that we had a survey of schools, and one of the things that schools were having difficulty sort of comprehending was, okay, yeah, we're very happy to go ahead and put together a body of standards for international agencies. And we had very good involvement in that. But the same question that came out of that group was, well, what about us? What is it that we need to be doing in order to sort of tie up both ends, or connect both ends, all the way from the natural parent to the student on the ground? And there is a lot of work to be done on that. We had to start in sort of one place, which came first, the chicken or the egg. We have decided to start with what we typically do with agencies, and I think this is really a call to action among the schools to really start discussing what it is that needs to be done relative to these kinds of standards in the training, and not just that, outside of the recruitment piece, what needs to be happening at home to make these students have safe and valuable experiences, and to make sure that that the program is a sustainable one. Finally, I would say on that front, I think that an emerging trend seems to be, in the immediate, is to be looking elsewhere, other than China specifically, to sort of diversify the portfolio of students, which helps to create a more sustainable model. But I think the combination of that and a body of standards and training, this is really a call for training for schools.
Wonderful. And to learn more about the new model standards, we've included that information in the comments section. And you also have your annual conference coming up in just a few weeks.
Yes, we are in November 6th through 8th in Orlando, Florida. You can go to our website and check it out. But we do have an annual conference, and still accepting folks to come to the conference. Hope you do. And there we share a number of things related to regulation and the like, but also new initiatives like this and best practices.
Wonderful. If we don't have any other questions, I think that is time for us. Chris, thank you so much for being here and sharing information about this process, the new model standards. We look forward to seeing how the pilot program goes and how this can affect positive change in support of international students coming to the U.S.
Thank you, Lindsay, very much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.